Wednesday, January 17th, we're continuing the Playing GM series this time around with the Boston Red Sox and the Arizona Diamondbacks. I'm Arm Layton. He's Peter Apple, and I'm excited to talk about the Red Sox for good reason, Peter. But also the Diamondbacks, kind of interesting because I feel like they've done a lot of what they've needed to do. So how can we kind of push them over the top? But before we get into all of that, as always, Peter, this show and as always is brought to you by
BetMGM, the king of sports books. The offer is still available, ladies and gentlemen, and a lot of you have sent me messages that you've used it already. But if you haven't yet, download the BetMGM Sports app on iOS or Android. Bet $5, but before that, use code JUSTBASEBALL. Bet $5 on standard odds. That's minus 110. Just a Lincoln, not more, not less, $5. And what happens when the bet is settled? You will get $158 in bonus bets. Why wouldn't you?
yeah,
Super Bowl 58. Just get some money loaded into the account. We're going to be unloading on MLB futures. We got plenty of MLB bets. And even if you aren't much of a gambler, might as well just use the free money they give you. Then you can stop if you want.
yeah.
So do it on BetMGM. Aram, last time, about a year ago, when we did the Diamondbacks GM episode,
Yeah.
we both sat here thinking we are going to unload on their over win total on BetMGM, but we weren't high enough. Why didn't we bet on them to win the World Series?
It's funny, man, because I loved their over win total for last year, which what was it, like 74? Something like
74 and a
that.
half. Just so
Yeah.
disrespectful.
And but at the same time, if you told me, hey, what are their chances of winning the World Series? I would have laughed. So, or even going to the World Series, I would have laughed. So it shows you the levels to it too. Like we were so set on them being over 74 and a half. I mean, we felt like that was the easiest pick of the year, and it ended up being that. But even still, I would have never even said, don't even waste your $5 free bet on the Arizona Diamondbacks, even winning the pennant. But now things kind of change a little bit, Peter, because this is a team that did get to the World Series. Yes, it's about getting hot at the right time, but clearly it's a team that is capable of playing at that level. And they've added some players. In the beginning, I said, let's start with the Red Sox. Do you want to start with the Diamondbacks now, the way you're leading us in here? Because, like, I feel like it is just the perfect conversation to segue us in here is one, do you believe it was an overperformance last year, and do they need to try to compensate for some things to just get back up to the upper 80s or 90 win total? And two, do you feel like they've addressed enough already to get them to where they need to be to compete for a playoff spot yet again? It's going to be hard for the division, so we're just really looking at a wild card spot, and then how is this team built for the playoffs?
So I'll answer the first question. Do I think that they overperformed? Kind of. But at the same time, there are some players currently on their roster that I expect to continue to play at the same level, maybe exceed it. Most notably, Gabriel Moreno and Brandon Pfaadt, right? So they're adding those two now really into the fold because we saw Brandon Pfaadt take that next leap, the leap that both of you and I thought that he would do all along. And then Gabriel Moreno, we're going to come out with our top 10s, right, at every position. And I wanted to rank Moreno higher because of how good he looked in the postseason, just how highly we think of him as a prospect. But you look at his regular season numbers, and I was underwhelmed. So I'm thinking to myself, well, now he's going to be better. And Ketel Marte in the playoffs put the team on his back. And when he stays healthy, he's just a freak in nature. Corbin Carroll, I don't think he's going to get worse.
No.
So I think they, of course, overperformed, and maybe by the metrics, they got a little bit lucky in one-run games. But then at the same time, I think they could be even better this year.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's just about getting in the playoffs, and then anything can happen.
Yeah.
So
And we're gonna go through like the transactions as always. And typically we go through it alphabetically, but Jack was not able to do this episode today, and Jack wants to do both the Chicago's, understandably so. So we're gonna save both the Chicago teams for the next episode. But you bring up a really good point, Peter, which is this team naturally is going to get better just based on a lot of the young stars or young quality players that they have continuing to just mature and improve. I do think the second half, I mean, Moreno was one of the best catchers, if not the best catcher in baseball in the second half. Both defensively, and then really putting together good numbers offensively. And then even Alec Thomas, like it seemed like something clicked for him in the playoffs and down the stretch of the regular season, but then especially in the playoffs. If that guy plays, even if he's a league average hitter, you're getting 3 WAR from him, and he wasn't a league average hitter last year. That was the problem. McCarthy showed some signs of life. Perdomo kind of got back going again after falling off a cliff in the second half. So which Perdomo do you get? It's one of those teams that I do think naturally is going to, I think, get better by its players, its young players continuing to get experience and mature. They also did something really important as we go through some of the transactions here is bringing back Lourdes Gurriel, which I think was really important because he's that vet. He's that consistent bat that you can add, or maintain in that lineup. They do lose Tommy Pham in free agency. Zach Davies also gone. Austin Adams is gone. Longoria, they'd cut Nick Ahmed earlier, so doesn't really matter. Madison Bumgarner doesn't really matter. Kyle
That's
Lewis
good. Some of
doesn't
these
really
things are
matter.
good. Some of these
Yeah,
things are good.
yeah. And Mark Melanson was not never really available for them, so that's more money for them to be freed up. Unfortunately, that multi-year deal just didn't go well. So those are the players that they quote unquote lose, aside from Gurriel, who they bring back. I think the only real loss there, I think Longo did provide some veteran leadership. I think he was a productive hitter at points when he was healthy. Really ran out of gas at the end of the year, but they bring back Gurriel, who can kind of be that vet for them, who's been there and done that with them over the last year and change. So in terms of the subtractions, I don't think you can really be upset about it aside from what Tommy Pham provided down the stretch and what Tommy Pham can provide against left-handed pitching.
Yeah. And you can kind of replicate Tommy Pham in another player. Like there's plenty of Tommy Phams out there. And it was good to see him have a little stretch in the postseason where he looked great. And then we got to the World Series and that kind of came crashing down a little bit. But overall, he was a solid postseason player for him. But like I said, the Diamondbacks over an entire season can find another Tommy Pham, right?
Yeah.
It's not that hard.
And I love the additions that they've made so far. And I'm excited to get your thoughts. We've talked about the moves in a vacuum, but just to make this team better, they go get Eugenio Suarez, capitalizing on the Mariners, just not really wanting to pay him. And they get him for what was a pretty minimal return. And then Eduardo Rodriguez, being able to sign him to a big deal, add him to the rotation. They needed a lefty. They needed just that safe, consistent guy to complement Merrill Kelly, who's that safe, consistent guy, and then Zach Gallen, who's been their frontline guy. Because if Brandon Pfaadt, stalls out a little bit, you're hoping that you're going to get what you got from the end of the year, Brandon Pfaadt, but you also don't want to over assume. I think they're going to get that, but just adding him to the fold, that's a really good four-headed monster. We'll visit that in a moment, but those were their big additions. They also signed Tucker Barnhart. He's a non-roster invitee, and that's really all they've had to do so far. So I ask you this, how much more do they really need to do? We can do the exercise where we go through the lineup, and you can just stop me when you think they need to potentially have an upgrade there. But again, I think we're going to be going pretty quickly through it because I think they're pretty set in a lot of spots.
Yeah, I look at the Diamondbacks and I would like one or two more bullpen arms, even though their bullpen was great in the playoffs. But again, you can't just hang your hat on one great playoff series because in the regular season, the bullpen at sometimes was the issue.
Yes.
So we can't blind ourselves, me included, saying Kevin Ginkel is the biggest nutsack in the history of Major League Baseball by looking at one short stint.
Yes.
I want to look at their entire body of work. So I think that this bullpen needs some more work. In the rotation, it's interesting. Do you want to rely on Tommy Henry? Do you want to rely on Ryan Nelson as kind of the 5 and whoever comes back up is good enough? Or should we sign a veteran pitcher? Do we just rock with it? But the offense, let's go position by position and explain to people why we're still really high on the Diamondbacks again.
Let's walk through it, dude. Corbin Carroll, I mean, good. Left field, covered. Ketel Marte at second base.
Wait, hold on. Left field, maybe forever. For the next 30 years, maybe 40.
Yeah. The statue, they're going to have a statue sitting there by the time he's done, too. So he'll just always be there.
I love him so much.
Ketel Marte, second base, just absolute dog.
Freak.
You don't have any questions there.
Nope.
Moreno at catcher, you're fine. Walker at first base, you're fine. Suarez at third base, you went out and just got. Alec Thomas in center field. Look, if he struggles, you could go look at some other options, but I love the way he finished the year. He's still 23 years old.
Yeah.
I think he's a great option in center field and such a good defender.
I made fun of Alec Thomas a lot at the beginning of the year because I thought it was an auto ground out to second base, and that's what it was for a good period of time. And then he starts getting into a little bit of a power stroke. And then I think to myself, I feel like Alec Thomas has been in the league for a couple of years, but he still is only 23 years old,
Yeah.
right? If he could develop a little bit of power, just some gap to gap power, right? Just spray doubles with that speed, playing that great a defense. I mean, this is a 3 to 4 win player. This is like what Trent Grisham is at his peak, even though his
Yeah.
peak is not anymore, but we know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. No, and the floor is just so high. Grisham still was one of the worst hitters at
Yeah.
points, and still was an everyday player. And I think Thomas is going to be better than that. And beyond that, I talked about it during the playoffs, but there were some mechanical adjustments that he made in his swing that I really did like, and I think that's part of why he was able to produce. You also get Lourdes Gurriel back. He's probably going to fill into that DH role. And then at shortstop, for now, if you look at Fangraphs roster resource, it's Geraldo Perdomo. It's probably going to be the guy that gets that role. But then also you have Jordan Lawler waiting in the wings. If you want to get him some more reps in AAA, you can do that. He did look a little bit overmatched at times. One of the best prospects in baseball. We're still extremely, extremely high on him. But I could understand maybe, wanting to work on some things there. So we'll see how they handle that
Yeah,
situation.
what do you predict in that situation? Because like you said, he's one of the best in baseball, but Geraldo Perdomo made an All-Star team and was making an impact in the World Series. Do you think the Diamondbacks, is it worth it for us to consider a trade? Get Geraldo Perdomo out of there? Is it worth it to even float Jordan Lawler in a big, nasty galaxy brain, get an entire team for Jordan Lawler type trade? Like, what do we do here? And what do the Diamondbacks do?
I think you got to ride it out with both of them because you have uncertainty both ways, right? Because you have Perdomo, who was a tale of two halves, and then you have Lawler, who's a young, and they're both very young. You have Lawler, who's a young prospect who's still trying to prove that he's ready to contribute at the big league level. So if Perdomo falls off a cliff, you need Lawler. If Lawler is really showing out and Perdomo's struggling, like you're going to be glad you had Lawler. So I feel like it's one of those tough spots. Well, also, if Lawler's struggling and just can't quite seem to get acclimated to the big leagues, you're going to be really happy that you had Perdomo because
Yeah.
they don't really have anybody else. I think the next guy in the pecking order is Blaze Alexander, who they added to the 40-man roster to protect from the Rule 5 draft. He's got big power, but I don't think that's a guy that you want at shortstop every single day, especially because he's going to be a lot worse defensively than the other two. So I feel like you almost have to play it safe and roll with both of them. And then if both are playing well, that's when maybe you approach a trade or consider a trade. But right now, I think you got to put both irons in the fire and hope one of them at least puts together a good year.
I guess, could we make a better Diamondbacks team trading Geraldo Perdomo and maybe signing a Tim Anderson, signing a Elvis Andrews, signing one of these veterans that will at least give you below average to average production, and then maybe we can go get a pitcher in exchange for Perdomo. I'm just trying to be strategic here. What works best for the Diamondbacks long term? Because you make a really good point, right? If Jordan Lawler isn't ready, you got Geraldo Perdomo. If Geraldo Perdomo truly was just a flash in the pan, now you give Jordan Lawler some run. So right now, doing nothing, they're totally fine. But if we are strategic, can we make the Diamondbacks better? What even is Geraldo Perdomo's value in the market in a trade? I think a lot of teams are going to look at him and say, what even is he? Because he
Yeah.
is a switch hitter. He plays great defense, but sometimes he hits and sometimes he doesn't. It truly was a tale of both halves. All-star in the first half, below average hitter, far below average hitter in the second half. And besides that front half, he was a below average hitter, but he is really young. It's a really tough deal. It might just be better to do nothing. I just
Yeah.
wanted to bring that question to the forefront.
No, it's a great question because I do see people talking about like, oh yeah, what should they do? And I think it's one of those things where you kind of let it take care of itself. I think sometimes when you count the chickens before they hatch and kind of force a deal, you can end up, leaving yourself exposed and leaving yourself in a bad spot. So I think Perdomo is very capped ceiling wise, but at the same time, I think the floor is very high for all the reasons that you just laid out. And in a perfect world, you have Lawler balling out. You put him at shortstop every single day. And Perdomo is still a guy that's going to get a lot of opportunity kind of all over the diamond and is going to be this super utility piece for you that's still very valuable. I think from that lens, I'd want to keep both, especially with the years of control and the money that you're going to have to put towards a Tim Anderson or towards somebody else. I know they're not going to be extremely expensive at all, but there's nothing that's cheap anymore. So these guys are, on the minimum pre-arb, roll with that, put that money towards the bullpen, because I agree with you. I think the bullpen is kind of I wouldn't say a weakness, but is definitely the one area where I could see things, maybe not looking as good as they looked in the postseason based on, some of the just hot streaks that players had.
Just how relievers are, right?
Yeah.
Like relievers are hot and cold. You could have a great run in the postseason, and then next time you get to the postseason, they all blow up because they're
Yep.
relievers. That's why nobody wants to commit any money to these guys because it's
Yep.
impossible.
Yep.
And just continuing what you were saying about the Perdomo Lawler thing. I mean, I love Ketel Marte, but there's a reason, right, that sometimes he ranks a little bit lower on these lists. He has played a lot of games in the past 2 years, right? 137 in 2022, 150 in 2023. But before that, he's missed some time.
Yeah.
So worst case scenario, right? You can move Perdomo to second, or you can move Lawler to second, and that can then be your middle infield tandem if Marte goes down. We hope he doesn't. He's been healthy the last 2 years, but it's good to just have both of them in house,
You,
regardless.
you actually bring up an excellent point. I didn't even really think about that. How about I'll expand that a little bit further? The fact that if you have, let's say, Ketel Marte's on the other side of 30, like you mentioned, you might want to keep him off his legs here and there. You might want to
Yeah.
just run through the DH spot. You don't have a guy that's a clog at DH. Gurriel can play the outfield. There's multiple scenarios here, right? Where one, if Jake McCarthy struggles, because that's the last player we didn't get to. If Jake McCarthy isn't hitting, then you could slide Gurriel to the outfield spot. You could then put Ketel at DH, and then you can have a middle infield of Perdomo and Lawler, which would be one of the best defensive middle infields in baseball. It'd be right up there, with the Cubs middle infield once these guys really get their feet under them, especially Lawler. So I do like that ability to mix and match too, where it's like, okay, it's not only an insurance policy for shortstop, it's an insurance policy for left field technically, or second base. So you have a guy that could end up, helping you really not lose too much if you're not getting production out of the corner with Jake McCarthy, or if, God forbid, Ketel Marte gets hurt. I think from that lens, it allows you to mix and match even more. So even more reason to have those two versatile infielders who can give you a lot of value with the glove.
And let's say you're giving Alec Thomas a rest. You put Ketel Marte in center because he can play in the outfield too. And then that would be your middle infield. And we aren't even talking about Ketel Marte having an off day or playing some DH or getting injured. And that's why it's almost like, should they add another middle infield bat or something like that? Because remember the Paul Sewald trade, Dominic Canzone is no longer a Diamondback, and neither is Josh Rojas. Those were depth pieces. And you needed to get that in order to get your closer, and that's fine. But right now on their bench, their backup infielder is Jace Peterson or
Yeah.
Emmanuel Rivera, right? Like, I don't know. Like, Emmanuel Rivera can play the corners, but he ain't playing up the middle. And Jace Peterson,
He could play some second,
play some
and third.
second, but I don't know how many times you want his bat in the lineup. So this might be, we might even have to sign Elvis Andrews and just because we need him.
Well, if you have Lawler up, I
True.
think in that lens you're good.
You might
I
be
think
good.
you're good because you got those two infielders. You want to keep them, in the lineup as much as possible. And then Rivera's a fine bench
Fine.
bat. Hits
100%.
lefties, I'm pretty sure. Peterson's a
I'm pretty
fine
sure.
bench bat.
Yeah, he does. That's all he does.
And then Dom Fletcher, I love as an insurance policy as well to McCarthy. He might even beat McCarthy out for the starting job. I still think Fletcher is better than McCarthy. I really like Dom Fletcher. I think he's a good player. I think he's still underrated. And I think he ends up maybe taking over that corner spot. So I think they have this good kind of open competition where they can ride the hot hand with some of these players. And that's always good. And then if you want to, potentially make a trade during the season, you can have a little bit more of an idea of who's performing and who isn't at that point.
What other offensive prospects do you think could make an impact this year for Arizona?
It's a good question, man. I think you could see Blaze Alexander at some point. Again, that's more of a bench infield option. But outside of that, like a lot of their best prospects are lower level guys. I mean, they've got Pavin Smith still in the fold there. Like, I don't know if they're going to use him really at
What do you
all.
mean? What do you
Yeah,
mean? Do you see him in the postseason? I think he hit like 700, right? He went like two
he
for
did
four.
have some
He
nice
went like
moments
three
in the
for four.
postseason. He
Don't sleep
did.
on Pavin. Pavin
I'm rooting for
so,
him. He had a cool story too. Like the second
so
he
good
got
in
a signing
college.
bonus, he paid off his parents' mortgage. which is super cool. That was a viral video way back, but rooting for him. But right now, I mean, you look at their top prospects; it's pretty much all lower level guys. So I don't really think anyone's going to make an impact outside of maybe a Jorge Barrosa. It's another guy I really like, but that's another outfielder. So I think they got to kind of stick with what they got, roll that way, and then now you look at the rotation, and
Yeah, wait, before we move on, we're good, right? I don't think we're going to do anything here.
I don't think we do a single thing.
I don't think we need to either. I don't think the Diamondbacks will. Look at the team, right? Go through it just position by position one more time. And for everybody listening, tell me what you would do because I wouldn't
Yeah.
do anything.
Corbin Carroll in left field, Ketel Marte at second base, Gabriel Moreno at catcher, Christian Walker at first base, Eugenio Suarez at third, Alec Thomas in center, Lourdes Gurriel at DH, Geraldo Perdomo at shortstop / Jordan Lawler, and Jake McCarthy in right field / Dominic Fletcher. The fact that even on like the two slightly question mark positions, you have another option that could be better is all I need.
And
So
then at the
I feel really good
deadline,
about that.
right at the deadline, let's say both are struggling for whatever reason, you could go get a right fielder at the deadline. Like
Oh
I'm
yeah.
sure the Nationals would listen on Elaine Thomas or
Yeah,
something like that, right?
absolutely. Absolutely. So we go to the rotation. Gallen, good.
Yeah, he's pretty
Merrill
good.
Kelly, Eduardo Rodriguez, Brendan Fott. That's set in stone.
Yep,
You don't have to worry about that.
we're good.
5 is the question. You got Ryan Nelson. Ryan Nelson for me is a serviceable 5. I think he's better than he pitched last year. I do think he can get that ERA below 5. But
Huge.
Trey Jameson would be the guy here if he was healthy.
Yep.
Unfortunately, went down with Tommy John surgery, and that was in September because he, I think had a little bit of an elbow issue, tried to come back from it, and that delayed the TJ. So he wiped out his next season as well, unfortunately, similar to Andrew Painter. I think you got to go look at some starters still, just because what happens if Merrill Kelly or Zach Gallen goes down, or Erod, any of those three, and even Brandon Pfaadt, right, coming off of probably the most innings he's ever thrown, if I'm not mistaken, if you include the postseason. Then what? You're going to a Slade Ciccone. You're going to Corbin Martin off of injury, Bryce Jarvis, Blake Walston, Tommy Henry. I don't have a lot of trust in those guys. So I do think you need one more starter in the fold here. I don't think it needs to be anything special, but I do think they need one more starter. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And there's 3 ways we can go about it. One is the 90th percentile, which means 90% this is what's going to happen. But there's also a couple of 5th percentiles out there. Do they
Okay.
sign the big pitcher? Right? Do they sign a Jordan Montgomery, a Blake Snell, someone like that? They have the pieces, right, in the lower levels to trade for one of these big fish, whether that be a Dylan Cease, a Corbin Burns, or whoever you want to put on that list. We could workshop those, but most likely this scenario will be they sign someone like an Alex Wood, right? You could bring in, see if Carlos Carrasco has any more juice left in the tank.
Yeah.
Michael Lorenzen, Mike Clevenger, guys like that, cheap options, 130 to 140 innings, probably at a mid 4 ERA. I think it's going to be better than what Ryan Nelson could give you. Or now this is an option that is probably more likely than signing the big fish or trading for somebody, is they just roll and hope Tommy Henry, Ryan Nelson, or Slade Ciccone, one of them works.
So this is the thing is I'm not totally against that if we use those funds, because I think the Diamondbacks historically haven't spent too much. They already spent a decent amount this year. We'll see how much I think they'll spend a little bit more in the right spot. But if we're going to use those funds, as much as we said we don't love to spend on relievers, I would rather probably get an elite reliever than, or at least a not elite, because elite's still going to cost ridiculous amount of money, but a very good reliever versus kind of a 4 or 5 starter, and that might be the difference there. There is one other starter I thought of, but I don't know what you would think of this. What about a Zach Greinke reunion?
Ugh, no. I mean, he's gonna. I would genuinely rather just roll with Henry, Ciccone, or Ryan
That's
Nelson. I
fair
think
enough.
realistically, all 3 could be better. I mean, Greinke last year with the Royals was a complete disaster. Like, I like the storyline returning. How many more storylines? How many more returns is Greinke gonna make? He already did his return to Kansas City. Is he gonna keep returning to these old teams that he's been on at age 40 and
I
just put up
hope.
a 7 ERA? I'm sick of it.
He's
I am.
tanking. He's tanking the win. He's tanking his win percentage for sure. 2-15 last year, and 4-9 the year before that. Yeah, fair enough. I will say before that, before last year, it was impressive how he could just hover around the low fours. But yeah, last year a 5.06 ERA. So I think I kind of agree with you. Just roll with what you've got. Look, I don't have a ton of faith in those guys, but I do think that they could be a serviceable five. I still think if anyone, Ryan Nelson can actually be a fine five. But if not, yeah, you can plug and play a Ciccone, a Tommy Henry, a Bryce Jarvis, even Corbin Martin now back off injury, and hope that one of those guys kind of has it come together for them. But if you're going to do that, what are we looking at in the bullpen here? Like, what do you feel like this bullpen is truly missing? Because going to get Seawald was a move for 2024 as well, which is great, and that's why it was a great move for them. Seawald closer solid, Ginkel solid as could be a 2.48 ERA last year. But after that, dude, I don't trust really anybody. I don't trust Miguel Castro. We talked about that through the postseason.
Yeah.
Andrew Salfrank, like I don't know what we're gonna get from him next year. And Joe Mantiply, I do think will be better. I think it was just a little bit of an off year for him. But do you trust Scott McGough?
No.
Ryan Thompson's fine.
The
Like
Arizona
I don't.
Diamondbacks didn't trust Scott McGough. Wasn't he not even in the postseason? It might have been an injury, but I didn't see him one time, I
Yeah,
don't
I
think,
don't
get
remember seeing
a
him.
appearance. And
I
I
don't remember
saw
seeing
him
him.
blow some of my bets when I was on Diamondbacks money line. That's what I saw.
Yeah. No, I don't trust that guy at all. And he's 34. So like I like Frias. I think Luis Frias could actually be a guy that ascends for them, but you're not
But he
counting on that. So
nasty.
they need an eighth inning, seventh, eighth inning guy. I mean,
Yeah.
your seventh inning guy cannot be Miguel Castro.
Yeah.
It can't, especially when your rotation's good but not elite. You got to go get a better reliever. But at the same time, these asking prices for some of these elite relievers is nuts. So is Neris like a good middle ground for them?
Well, instead of spending money, and I know I keep bringing this up, but the Miami Marlins keep telling everybody that they're open for business and they might trade Luis Arias now. Could Tanner Scott, right? Because they could use a lefty, right? Mantiply has shown you good. He's also shown you bad. And Sal Frank hasn't really shown you much, right? He could be a good piece in the bullpen, but those are your lefties, right? So that's why we could go sign a Wandy Peralta, who we've given to like 5 different teams because he's a perfect fit, or we could make a trade for Tanner Scott. It wouldn't be
Okay.
crazy expensive. Or we could just sign Josh Hader. It's not going to happen.
So I'm glad you said it. I didn't want to be the guy. Like I had the exact thought before you and I hopped on, but I didn't want to be the guy that's just always like workshopping trades with the
The
Marlins.
Marlins are the team open for business with plenty
Yes,
of players that can help a bunch of different teams. So might as well just sell them all off.
exactly. And at least the ones that make the most sense. Like there is no reason for the Marlins if they are relatively open for business. I can understand holding on to Luzardo. I want them to personally, but why hold on to a reliever that's already well into his arb, only has a couple more years of control? Like move him. He's already kind of expensive for you. I think he's like 5.8 million. But Tanner Scott could also be a guy that closes games for them when it's a left-handed heavy ninth inning. Can be that setup guy. Can kind of be the Swiss Army knife for them. And like the lower level prospects that the D-backs have to offer, I think could get a deal done pretty easily for them if the Marlins and Diamondbacks were able to kind of match up there. I don't hate it. I wonder how aggressive they're going to be through that lens. Like, would they rather go spend on an Eris, or do they think that they could actually pull off a trade here? And would they rather part with some of their prospects here? Because the system's fine. Like, I think the struggles of Drew Jones um, really kind of make this system a little bit thinner than you think too.
But
Because I like Tommy Troy, I
Drew
like
Jones
Jordan
is also
Waller.
super young. I mean, I'm my takes on Drew Jones are, I don't know if I've said them publicly. I don't really want them out on the air though.
I mean, just look at the numbers from last year. Look at the swing. It's a work in progress, right? Like, and then outside of that, I mean, outside of their top three guys, though, it kind of drops off pretty quickly with Gino Groover and Jack Hurley, guys that they just drafted. Ivan Melendez, who, I don't have a lot of faith in. AJ Vukovic is okay. When a guy who hasn't played for years and Christian Robinson is like one of your more intriguing prospects outside of the top 10, it kind of gets a little shaky. So, like, I don't know if they're going to want to part from this system. They might want to have those resources for when, they're closer to the deadline. So
But
if
isn't
that's the
it
case,
isn't it up right now, right? Isn't this kind of the window, right? They don't have the greatest farm system, but then you look at the team and it's all these young, incredible players. So while they don't have a great farm system below those guys, Corbin Carroll was the number one prospect in baseball. Gabby Moreno was a top 10 prospect. Brandon Pfaadt was one of the best pitching prospects in baseball. These guys are all up now. So right now, I feel like is the time to kind of push the chips in the middle. You just went to a World Series. Don't get complacent here. You can still now beat anybody. You've already proved it. Imagine the Diamondbacks get back into the postseason and everybody's doubting them again. They're going to have that same edge with experience this time, going to the bank, beating the Phillies. They already swept the Dodgers. They are not afraid of the Dodgers, right? The Dodgers can keep adding whoever they want. The Diamondbacks know, hey, you got to come in and beat us now. Straight up. They just swept them. They didn't beat them in a series where they got lucky. They beat the living piss out of them. Respect to all the Dodgers fans out there. But that's what happened. So
yeah.
if I'm the Diamondbacks, you kind of are making some moves that tell me you agree with me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, they've been as aggressive as we've seen them.
They're going to get Eduardo Rodriguez. Like, I think now you call the Brewers and see what Devin Williams is going to cost. You call the Marlins about Tanner Scott, right? Like, they don't have a great system, but they have enough to trade for a reliever. At least I think.
Here's my problem with the farm is if I'm the Marlins, I'm not doing it for basically anybody outside of their top three because it drops off so badly. It's same with the Brewers. And if I'm the Diamondbacks, I'm not trading Jordan Lawlar, Drew Jones, or Tommy Troy for a reliever. So you're kind of stuck there.
What if
Right?
you
Like
traded Tommy Troy and pieces for Devin Williams? Or would
you're
it
gonna need
cost
more
more?
pieces than that.
Yeah.
So they're in this tweener zone where I almost wonder just go sign two relievers.
We could
Matt
do that.
Moore. Matt Moore's your lefty, unless they really like Sal Frank.
What about Wandy Peralta? I mean, he's legit better than Matt Moore is. Matt
Is he
Moore,
is he better?
we have no guarantee if he's even going to last the season. Go check out Wandy's stats. Just do a little query over there.
Okay.
Do a little query.
What do you think? What do you think Hector Neris brings in?
More than I think we'd want to admit. There's like 4 teams in on him right now. He might be a 3-year, $45 million guy.
I mean, yeah, he declined an $8.5 million option.
Yeah.
So hit a 171. Yeah, I don't want to buy high on a guy like that. So
On Neris or on Wandy?
no, Neris.
I'd rather buy
Yeah.
Wandy. We need a lefty anyway.
All right, Wandy. And then we go one more. Do we go with?
We could almost, I wonder how much Alex Wood is going to cost because he could provide some starting pitching versatility as well as kind of be an opener, like a 3-4 inning guy. Because they, like I said, they're kind of missing that now with Dre Jameson going down, but maybe Tommy Henry just ends up being that guy. So maybe Alex Wood, it's like, well, if you sign Alex Wood, that's just the older version of Tommy Henry. But like, just get someone who's super reliable, like a John Brebbia, who I feel like throws 6 times a week for the San Francisco Giants over the years. Yeah, those are the guys that I'd be interested in. Wandy, I don't think he's going to be that expensive. If you want a little bit of an edge, you could consider Amir Garrett.
I would say, what about an Aroldis Chapman?
No, dude, no. Like if
No,
I'm a team, I just don't even want him, and he's going to be kind of expensive. Aroldis Chapman should go to the Angels.
that's a great place for him.
Yeah,
Just finish it out over there.
yeah, go to the Angels.
It's
and
like
then
he
Artie
still was
Moreno will be like, "We just got Aroldis Chapman. You think we're not in? How dare you?"
I mean, like he was good. I know that he like hit a wall and like I know he has those unusable
You don't want him.
times.
I'm being honest. You can
I
sign him if you want. I am not co-signing it.
the
We're the
season
owners right now. I'm not doing it.
the season that he had last year would have been one of the better seasons he had as a Yankee. But I get it, but it's a 3.09 ERA. It's 16 Ks per nine. Like, that's pretty good, man.
I know, it's just he has 101 and he still looks like the greatest reliever of all time. Then he's at 96 and he gets punished. I just, and maybe it's my bias just being so done with the world as Chapman over
But
the years.
like, you're gonna say no every episode. Who's gonna who's gonna sign him?
The Angels. It's
That's
perfect.
the only time we're gonna
I think I
mock him
already
to
mocked him
someone.
to the Angels.
Um, okay. I do agree. Someone that could be stretched out a little bit would be nice to go with a Wandy. Um, I feel like Colin McHugh could be an option. He doesn't really
Definitely.
get stretched out much anymore, but he could still easily do that. He opened once last year, but he's opened several times in the last few years. Did it 7 times with the Rays. Uh, I kind of like him as an option for them.
Yeah. I'm down with Colin McHugh and Wandy Peralta.
All right. That's probably about it, right? Like they don't need much.
No, they just went to the World Series and now they're getting more reinforcements and they already kind of did some deals for us. That's the,
That's
we're
the thing. Yeah,
towards the
we should have
tail
done
end
them
of playing
earlier in
general
the
manager. We
yeah.
probably would have added an Eduardo Rodriguez. We might have added a Eugenio Suarez, and yet here we are, right? They did it for us. We
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have guessed it was Suarez, but we would have added a third baseman. I know a lot of us at the beginning thought Matt Chapman was
Mm-hmm.
could be a good signing for Arizona, and they decided they'd rather trade for Suarez.
Can
So now all they need to do is add a couple of bullpen arms, and let's go back and try and win a World Series this time, Arizona.
and can I say I like the approach? I'm glad you mentioned that. I like the approach a lot more of trading for Suarez and uh signing Eduardo Rodriguez instead of just paying Matt Chapman because it's probably
Yeah,
going to even out financially to about the same. Way better approach.
way
So
better.
good job there, by the D-backs. I like everything that they're doing so far. So not the sexiest playing GM, but you know what? That's a testament to the Arizona Diamondbacks. It'll be a little bit more interesting for this next team, though.